Visit licensureexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge. Hello to all you marvelous therapists out there, and welcome to our Licensure Exams podcast. I'm Stacy Frost, your host for today's episode. Normally, I'm joined by my fantastic co-host, Dr. Linton Hutchinson, who calls Florida home. But right now, he's probably off dodging pythons and alligators, something we don't have to worry about here in Michigan, where the lakes are pretty much cold enough to scare off anything with teeth. So let's jump right into today's episode about narcissistic personality disorder, which is part of our Demystifying Disorders series. When you hear the term narcissism, you might think of someone who's completely self-absorbed, always bragging about their accomplishments, and someone who doesn't really care about anyone else's feelings. And while that captures some of the surface level traits, narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, goes much deeper than just being vain or self-centered. NPD is a complex personality disorder that affects a person's entire way of thinking, their way of feeling, and their way of behaving, especially in relationships. People with NPD have an inflated sense of their own importance, a deep need for admiration, and they often struggle with empathy toward others. But here's the catch. Beneath all of that grandiosity is a very fragile sense of self, one that's highly sensitive to any perceived criticism or failure. So, how does this pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy manifest? Well, to diagnose narcissistic personality disorder, the client needs to exhibit at least 5 of these 9 traits or behaviors. Number 1, an inflated sense of self-importance, where they're often bragging about and exaggerating their accomplishments and expecting recognition for their superiority without having the achievements to really back it up. Number 2, fixated on fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or the perfect love. Number 3, believes they are special and unique, thinking only others of high status or special individuals can truly understand them or are worthy of their company. For example, they'll insist on having only the top doctor or the top designer, and they'll associate themselves with the best institutions. But they'll be the first to devalue those people or organizations who disappoint them. Number 4, craves excessive admiration from others. They might fish for compliments, be shocked if others aren't impressed with their possessions like luxury cars or expensive watches or purses, and feel deeply unsettled when they aren't praised or admired. Number 5, displays a strong sense of entitlement, expecting special treatment or automatic compliance with their expectations. And if they don't get this, they're either really confused or they're really ticked off. Number 6, exploits others in interpersonal relationships, using people to achieve their own goals. They tend to form friendships or romantic partners only if those people appear likely to provide some kind of benefit, like elevating their social status, offering financial support, or serving as a source of admiration. And once that person no longer serves their needs or fails to meet their expectations, they quickly chuck the relationship out the window. Number 7, lacks empathy and is unwilling or unable to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Now, they may have cognitive empathy, where they can understand another person's feelings on an intellectual level, but they don't have emotional empathy, where they actually feel or share in another person's emotions. And this means they might be able to read someone's emotions or manipulate them based on what they observe, but they don't genuinely connect or care about how the other person feels. So, for example, they might recognize that someone is upset, but instead of offering support, they might use that vulnerability to their advantage or just dismiss the person's feelings as being unimportant. Number 8, often feels envious of others or believes that others are envious of them. If they see someone else achieving success, receiving admiration, or possessing something they want and don't have, they might criticize or downplay that person's accomplishments. And this is something called devaluation, which is a type of defense mechanism that the narcissist will use to regain control over their own self-worth and maintain their sense of superiority. And number 9, demonstrates arrogant or haughty behaviors and attitudes. They tend to come across as snobby and condescending, often acting as if they're above others or too important to engage with people they deem inferior. Now, as I've talked about the criteria, you might be thinking, gee, I can name a handful of people in my life who seem to fit that description. But before you go diagnosing everyone around you, it's important to remember that we all have narcissistic traits to some degree. And what separates narcissistic personality disorder from occasional self-centered behavior is the consistent, pervasive pattern of these traits across different areas of life and how much they negatively impact relationships, work, and overall functioning. For someone with NPD, these behaviors aren't just occasional. They're part of a deeply ingrained pattern that causes significant distress, especially to those around them. It's not simply about having a big ego. It's about an inability to form healthy, balanced relationships because their need for admiration and control takes precedence over empathy and connection. So, why does all this matter for you as therapists who are studying for the licensure exam? Well, individuals with NPD rarely come to therapy saying, hey, I think I have a personality disorder. They're more likely to present with other issues like depression, anxiety, or relationship problems, and they often blame others for their struggles. So recognizing these narcissistic patterns is important for creating an effective treatment plan that addresses the underlying disorder rather than just those surface level symptoms. Now, before we get into treatment strategies, let's touch on how NPD develops. And there are some different theories about the main factors that contribute to the development of NPD. One school of thought is that parenting practices, specifically a parent's constant criticism or neglect, leads the child to feel vulnerable and unable to trust others. And as a way to cope with those feelings, they create a persona of being better than others and shield themselves from feelings of inadequacy or rejection. Another theory suggests that overindulgent or excessive praise during childhood can contribute to the development of NPD. And in this case, the child might grow up feeling entitled and overly special, believing that they deserve constant admiration and attention because that's what they were conditioned to expect. So whether it's from a lack of emotional support or too much emotional support, the individual learns to rely on external validation to feel secure. And that's one of the key aspects of NPD, this constant need for admiration from other people to maintain their fragile self-esteem. Now, as you can see, NPD does not just develop overnight or even over a few months. This is a lifelong thing that's been happening here. So therapy is not going to be a short-term process. The most helpful approaches for positive personality changes will be psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, and schema-focused therapies. And to make significant, lasting personality changes, we are talking years, not months of therapy. This kind of long-term commitment can be a challenge for many clients. So for some clients, brief therapy that focuses just on the symptoms that they're coming to you with and goals around a specific crisis, that might be more appropriate. For example, a client might come in saying, I'm not getting the respect I deserve at work and my boss is an idiot. In this case, the therapist can focus on helping the client manage their frustration and reframe their thinking in the short term, while also encouraging some insight into how their expectations and behaviors may be contributing to the problem. But without long-term therapy, that deeper personality work, like developing empathy or addressing the grandiosity, may not be fully addressed. As you can imagine, engaging a client with narcissistic personality disorder in therapy can be challenging due to their resistance to self-reflection, tendency to externalize problems, and reluctance to acknowledge their own vulnerabilities. However, there are some effective strategies that you as therapists can use to build rapport and engage the client in the therapeutic process. And one approach is to validate their perspective without feeding the narcissism. So how do you do this? Well, Narcissistic clients often feel misunderstood or devalued, so it's really important to validate their experiences and emotions without reinforcing their grandiosity. Acknowledging their feelings of frustration or injustice in a way that makes them feel heard, while also setting the stage for deeper exploration, is something you can consider doing. So you might say something like, I can understand why you feel frustrated when your hard work goes unrecognized. It sounds like being acknowledged is really important to you, and that makes a lot of sense. Let's explore how these situations affect you and what we can do to address them in a way that feels fair to you. Another strategy is to emphasize the benefit to their goals. So, narcissistic clients are often motivated by personal gain. So, framing therapy as something that will help them achieve their goals can engage them more effectively. Whether it's improving relationships, enhancing their professional success, or achieving more control over their emotions, link therapy to the outcomes they want. For example, you might say, this process can help you not only navigate your work frustrations more effectively, but also strengthen your ability to get the recognition that you deserve. You can also introduce self-reflection slowly when working with a client who has NPD. Encouraging self-reflection can be tricky with these clients who are often resistant to looking at their own flaws. So start with small, manageable steps that don't overwhelm or threaten their ego, and gradually work toward deeper insight. In therapy, you might say, I notice that you're very focused on how others are letting you down. I wonder if there's a pattern here that we could explore together. What do you think might be contributing to these repeated frustrations? Now, before we wrap up today's episode, I want to mention a few differentials that you'll want to consider as you're studying for your exam. There are some other personality disorders that are commonly confused with NPD. And I'll give you a little bit of background here. So all of the personality disorders are grouped into 3 clusters, A, B, and C, based on some traits that they share. NPD is one of 4 disorders included in the cluster B category, which includes antisocial, borderline, histrionic, and of course, narcissistic. Clients with these personality disorders tend to be dramatic, emotional, or erratic. And some of the common themes that you'll see with these disorders are impulsivity, emotional volatility, interpersonal difficulties, and a distorted self-image. Now, the key feature that you'll see with NPD that sets it apart from other personality disorders is the grandiosity. Basically, you have an ego that is out of control and constantly needs to be stroked. With both NPD and antisocial personality disorder, you'll see manipulative behavior and a lack of empathy. But antisocial has this added criminal component that's not typical of NPD. A client with antisocial personality disorder has a history of conduct disorder and a long-standing pattern of violating the rights of others in the form of aggression, deceit, and/or reckless behavior. NPD also needs to be distinguished from histrionic personality disorder. And these 2 disorders both involve a pathological need for attention. With NPD, that attention has to be in the form of admiration. With histrionic, on the other hand, their focus is on being the center of attention through emotional displays, dramatic behavior, and an excessive concern about how they look. Their primary motivation is to be seen and acknowledged, not necessarily respected or admired. In fact, they're willing to be seen as vulnerable or even needy. And finally, we need to differentiate NPD from borderline personality disorder. Both can involve unstable relationships and intense emotional reactions. But with BPD, the primary focus is on a fear of abandonment and emotional instability. Individuals with BPD may idealize and then quickly devalue others, but this pattern is driven by their emotional sensitivity and their fear of being left, not by the grandiosity or the need for admiration that we see with NPD. And one more differential that's important to cover is bipolar disorder. And I mentioned grandiosity as the key feature of NPD. Well, that is also a symptom that pops up with mania and hypomania. And the big difference between NPD and the bipolar disorders is the mood changes that you'll see with bipolar disorders. You won't see that mood change feature with NPD. So there you have it, a crash course in narcissistic personality disorder. And here is a quick recap. Narcissistic personality disorder is one of the cluster B personality disorders and involves grandiosity, a need for admiration, a lack of empathy, and a fragile self-esteem that requires constant validation. To diagnose NPD, according to the DSM-5-TR, a client must exhibit at least 5 of 9 specific traits that include inflated self-importance, fantasies of success, entitlement, exploitive behavior, and the list goes on. NPD is also confused with antisocial personality disorder, which involves criminal behavior, histrionic personality disorder, which is focused on attention, and borderline personality disorder, which is really driven by a fear of abandonment. Long-term therapy is really needed for those deep personality changes. Think psychodynamic and schema-focused therapy. But brief therapy can focus on crisis management and addressing surface level symptoms. Effective engagement with a client who has NPD involves validating their feelings without feeding their grandiosity, linking therapy to their personal goals, and introducing self-reflection gradually. Now, as you're gearing up for your licensure exam, remember, you've got this. You've put in the hard work, the hours of study, listening to this podcast episode counts, and now it's time to trust yourself. When your exam day comes, just remember all of that knowledge that you need to pass with flying colors, it's in there.